How is Christ the Son of God? Well, to begin with, we are all children of God. Each and every one of us. A lot of us are quite distant from a godly frequency, quite distant from source because of the gift of free will that is in the world, the gift that belongs to us to make our own decisions and act with autonomy. Us being able to act in the world like we do makes it to where we fall short from the glory of God through sin, through negative works. Either that's selfishness or greed or gluttony. Through free will, humans' fleshly desires emerge to the surface, and we fall short from the glory of God in this way. However, Christ lived a perfectly aligned life, perfectly aligned with God and Source and the community around him and what he needed to do. Jesus Christ's life was completely flawless. He was completely generous, and the symbol behind Christ was and is completely beautiful and completely aligned with Source. How can Christ be God? How can the infinite become flesh? God himself entered his creation not as an idea or a prophecy, but as a man encapsulated in flesh, just like you and I. This is not superstition. It is a metaphysical necessity. If God is perfect love, then that love must become visible. And Christ is that visibility. Christ is the infinite rendered as intelligible. Christ is the apex of consciousness and awareness and love. Through an evolutionary lens, society deems highest that which is most aligned with bearing fruit and consciousness and awareness, compassion, unity, self-sacrifice. And Christ represents the pinnacle of that trajectory, the human form operating at the divine frequency. Christ is morally flawless, selfless, and infinitely compassionate, like you and I seemingly can be, but we continuously fall short. Christ's perfection heals the wounds that are brought by our wickedness, by our fleshly tone for destruction and selfishness. Christ embodies flesh to show that it's not impossible to be aligned with God, to be aligned with what is good, and to be in our fleshly beings. To make God as personal as he was able to, he encapsulated himself in flesh, perfectly personified, so you and I no longer need to anthropomorphize onto God, and instead we have a real, full man, full God at our fingertips, instead of having to abstract and feel that sense of falsity. The nature of Christ is complete alignment with Source. Christ is God's perfect self-expression. What Christ stands for, truth, resurrection, sacrifice, and compassion, are all innately derived from Source, are all innately the same spirits that come from God. Therefore, Christ is the closest and clearest possible expression of God in the realm of flesh. Christ is not a man filled with God like you and I can be, but Christ is God filled in man. Christ is the Logos made flesh. The infinite entered the finite, not diminished, but fracted. John 1:14, it states, "The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh." Christ is fully God and fully man, not half God or half man. It's a unity of natures in one person, not a union that dilutes either nature, not a union that dilutes either man or God, but a harmony that reveals both, which is kind of the point of how God manifests itself through reality, period. The universe and Source is innately curious to represent itself and to see itself, and particularly to see itself on other manifested expressions, aka other human beings or other animals or other systems. In space, they are mutually able to react and be reacted upon with one another. That's the universe seeing itself. That's reality. That's Source seeing itself. It's an act of comparison and an act of observation. So universe, Source, God could overall project itself and adapt and evolve in a unification state, in a state that is blessed through conscious awareness and intelligence. Christ is like eternity expressed through a finite equation. The divine essence did not cease to be infinite. It simply translated itself in time and in flesh for our accessibility, for our ease. This is what is known as the Hypostatic Union. God in man, man in God, in Trinity made observable in our realm, instead of having to abstract or tread as close as we can to the idea without even touching it. This allows us to not have to think or not have to abstract. It's right here, right in front of us, which is one of the miraculous ways in which God works. Christ is the living intersection of heaven and earth. So why Christ must be God? Perfect revelation requires perfect embodiment, meaning a transcendent God cannot be known unless it reveals itself. For that revelation to be perfect, it must be God himself, not merely a messenger. Therefore, the incarnation is logical necessity and not some sort of myth or fantasy. And then we have the Logos. Now, the Logos practically means the source's innate, broad motivation. That's practically what Logos means. Christ equals the Logos, the rational structure and consciousness amongst reality, the consciousness that reality is made up from. This is the same intelligence that orders mathematics, that designs and establishes DNA strands, that builds solar systems and complex molecular machines, animals, human beings. Everything that we observe in the universe, this is what it is derived from. And Christ completely envelops Logos. Christ is the pinnacle of all that can be good. Christ is the pinnacle of light. Christ is the pinnacle of awareness and consciousness and source. Therefore, he is Logos incarnate. Christ is the rational fabric of existence personified. Infinite atonement requires infinite worth. And what do I mean by this? If sin is rebellion against the moral order, then its reconciliation of that sin must carry the same amount of weight. The rebuction of that wickedness is equal, if not more powerful than that wickedness itself, through the flesh of Christ and through the awareness of source. Only God can bear infinite moral gravity. Therefore, Christ's divinity is not optional. It is required for salvation to be metaphysically coherent. And some attributes that we think only God has, Christ has too, like forgiving sins, or how he commanded nature and read hearts and read what was on people's minds and people's tongues and the skeletons in their closets. He was able to see past that and love them infinitely like Source does. Christ also redefined law, and Christ claimed internal identity. These are very unique things that we have assumed that are only attributes of God. Christ's actions and authority cannot merely exist in just a human frame. It transcends and supersedes this world completely. And that's one of the reasons it has such weight and such gravity in our world, in our realm, because they infinitely transcend everything, every dimension, every layer of abstraction, and every resolution. And now with the resurrection, we see that Christ transcends death itself. Death is entropy made visible, and Christ didn't die. Christ didn't garner this sort of entropy. And to reverse this entropy and to reverse this death process is seemingly to wield power beyond the natural order. It's a level of supernatural ability. Christ is resurrected, and whether or not you want to get into the logistics of that, it's secondary to the main argument. What are we seeing now in society? Well, we see that the ideas and symbol behind Christ is permeating culture without Christ seemingly being here in flesh. So isn't that definitively Christ's resurrection in the world? Aren't we carrying Christ's resurrection through the Logos, through Source? There is a surge of young Christians and young people turning to Christ. Isn't that the resurrection? Isn't that Christ coming back in the flesh because we are translating his symbol and what he stood for thousands of years ago? It seems like that's a resurrection. And if not, it's pretty damn close. That resurrection transcended the laws of space and time, thermodynamics, laws of physics. It's foolish for us to assume how Christ is going to be resurrected, how Christ is going to return, because it's such a infinitely beautiful and almost omnipotent idea within itself. We just need to trust that what is good will transpire and that the light supersedes the darkness completely, which is what Christ does say. Christ transforms not just humans' identity or humans' behavior, humans' being in general, humans' deep sense of self. It completely revolutionizes and reinvents somebody's heart and somebody's heart posture. Christ doesn't just teach morality, but he seemingly recreates people's sense of self. His influence multiplies throughout time, just like light does when it enters a dark room, particularly without losing intensity. This transformative force mirrors the signature of God, bringing order out of chaos, bringing life from death and love from despair. If the fruit is divine, then the root itself must also be divine. So without Christ being God, morality collapses into relativism. Consciousness becomes a chemical hallucination. Love becomes evolution's illusion. And now with Christ as God, morality is anchored in internal truth. Consciousness is divine inheritance. Love is not utility, but the nature of existence. Last but not least, death becomes a doorway, not destruction, not the endpoint. Christ is not optional in the story of the cosmos. He is literally the center of it. He is what has always been, and he is what the universe has been trying to manifest as for what seems to be billions upon billions upon billions of years of natural adaptation, evolution, and the laws of thermodynamics through source. Christ is the pinnacle of light, love, and selflessness. And if that isn't God, if that isn't God's child, if that isn't the Son of God, then I don't know what is. And I think trying to conceptualize what could be closer to the Son of God seems to be missing the mark. There's a amount of taking these sort of things at face value and realizing, you know what, maybe Christ is the Son of God just through these means. Who cares about the logistics on did Christ have a virgin mother? Did Mary get impregnated by God? Does Jesus have a biological father? These are incredibly important and beautiful theological topics that hold an immense amount of weight. However, it may be secondary to this point that I'm trying to make. Jesus Christ lived a perfect, honest, and ultimately selfless life that ultimately led to seemingly his demise on the cross. His whole life was that of an innate sacrifice for his love to be abundant on earth and for all of us to envelop that Christ consciousness and that spirit that led Christ. And if that isn't godly, if that isn't God's child, if that isn't God's son, then I don't know what is. Then it seems like none of us know what it is or what it could be. And lastly, Christ is not a mirror reflecting God. Christ is God looking through human eyes, which is the same phenomenon happening with you and I. But you and I are ultimately wicked and entrenched in the world. Does that mean that we are not able to live like Christ or live a perfect life? No, we can, but seemingly we fall short each second of each day. But through Christ's sacrifice, we're able to look at him and look through him and have that heart posture that carries out our days. If our heart posture is in line with Christ and in line with Christ's abundant alignment with source, then we will be okay through that sacrifice. And that's the story of the Gospels, and that's the story of Christ. He did what he did so we do not have to. And that does not mean that our works are not important or our heart posture is not important. It definitely is. Our heart posture and our authenticity when it comes to how we treat others and treat ourselves and our ideas that are internal, that is innately important. And secondarily, our works and our actions in the world speak volume. But our internal connection in the afterlife with God or disconnected from God, seemingly it has to do with our heart posture and how genuinely and authentically we are open to source and to the godly spirit. And maybe even more importantly, our condemnation and hatred towards that which is wicked and that which is destructive for humanity and for civilization's abundance. God is like the sun. We can't look at the sun. Its radiance is too bright. And Christ is that beam of sun that touches earth, carrying its nature intact. The infinite didn't descend to flesh to become less. He entered creation to bring us up to himself and help us familiarize with himself. I hope you guys and gals enjoyed this video, and any ideas or topics you want to talk about in the replies, please do so. I will most definitely reply to the best of my ability. I hope everybody enjoyed this video, and let me know what you think about it. I hope y'all have a fantastic day, week, month, and year. With that being said, I will see all of you in the next one.